So, dear friends, dear everybody, welcome to today's webinar. It's in celebration of International Self-Care Day, which always happens on the 24th of July. One of the things I love about this date is that it's written as 24/7. For those of us not in the US or in Canada, you tend to go 7/24. But this idea that self-care really is a 24/7 thing. It isn't just something for sort of the holidays. It isn't just something for special moments. Self-care is something that we do and need all day, every day. And for many of us, it's a path of getting there. It's not something that we kind of are raised to do. And for many of us, we need to kind of start gently, slowly to build it up and get a sense of, well, how do I do this thing called self-care? This year's theme, because this is a theme that runs internationally, it's originally raised by the International Self-Care Foundation. We've got the Global Self-Care Federation as well on board now, and the Self-Care Forum. They're all advocating this idea of a self-care day and working through the pillars of self-care. So last year it was mental health. This year is physical health and particularly movement. So I'm very pleased to present to you today my two colleagues, David Brown and Sarah Jones. And together we'll be talking about befriending your body, befriending our body. And that kind of idea of befriending being something that we kind of need to do before we can actually do any active and meaningful physical activity. So I'll be introducing them in a moment, but to start with, I want to introduce you to Zoe, my colleague. Zoe, so if you could wave. Zoe is like, for those of you who know Star Trek, she's like my first officer, and she really is a great team member to have, and she really helps me do my self-care in terms of the way I run the Helpful Clinic, the way we do first aid for feelings, the way we do the activities that we do, including outreach activities like these. So bringing in David and Sarah, I'll start with David. David joined us last year when we were talking about mental health. David Brown is a colleague through a business network called Drive the Collaborative Network, which is a group of entrepreneurs, freelancers, social entrepreneurs. And it really tickles me that we are working together more and more through this space. And because it's a group of people that are all doing business and doing work, and then in a way that has meaning to us and where we want to make a difference in the world. So I'll be handing over to David in a minute. He's very much into sovereign leadership, which I love, and I look forward to hearing his explanation of how he explains that to you. But also training in embodiment, and has worked a lot and done a lot of martial arts, and really has kind of coming through to self-awareness and self-experience through the body. If I am understanding that reasonably correctly there, David, thank you. And Sarah, I'm so tickled to have her here now. There was somebody called Swava Brooks going to be on the panel. She was here with us last year. She had to pull out about a month ago due to other reasons, family situations. And I said to David, do you know anybody with, roughly who kind of has got experience of trauma, embodiment? And he was like, I know just the person. So we met her with Sarah, and it was just like, yeah, beautiful match. And I'm so glad to have you here with us, Sarah. And what I love about Sarah's work is that it's not just that it's trauma informed, that it's working on that being in the body, but she very much is coming at it from the place of relationships. So not only self-relationship, but also relationship with others. So I'll be asking her to talk a little bit about that in a moment. For those of you who don't know me, because I know some of you don't know me yet, my name is Thor. I'm a health activist first and foremost. I also am a social entrepreneur. I've launched the Helpful Clinic. It's going to be 10 years this December since I launched the Helpful Clinic. So that feels like a major achievement. And I ran the first Aid for Feelings course back in 2013. And First Aid for Feelings is very close to my heart because it was something that I developed when I needed it, like over 20 years ago when I was ill and really ill. And one of the things that I often talk about is that one of the reasons I am a health activist, one of the reasons that the topic today is so dear to me, is that at that time when I realized I didn't know anything about my health or what First Aid for Feelings might look like, is that I had no relationship with my body. I didn't really recognize my body as an aspect of my reality. I really related to myself as this walking head who had a lot of intellectual knowledge, but not embodied, not really any sense of how to be in my body and how to hear and listen to my body. So for me, it's been a journey of befriending my body to the point where we now have a beautiful relationship. Me and my body are such good friends. So I will be talking about that through the questions today. So I want to hand over to David first. So David, if you could tell us a little bit, I know you've just taken a sip of your drink. If you could just give us a moment, a few insights into your journey and kind of what you do and why you're here today. And then I'll come over to you, Sarah, as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Thor, and welcome everyone. Lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces and names. So yeah, I'm David, and for as far back as I can remember, I have always had a real fascination with myths and legends and fairy tales. And one of the things that I started to notice about these stories is that there was always this intimate relationship between the king or the queen, the sovereign, so the health of the king and the queen, and also the health of the realm. And because of this relationship, it really seemed clear to me that these stories were like a metaphor for our lives. So, however well I felt inside really reflected on how healthy and wonderful my life looked uh, outside of myself. So, um, when I do my coaching, I coach people who have who are physically disabled, but I also work with people who are physically also very able. And one of the things that they really have in common is that they're experiencing some kind of emotional pain or discomfort, possibly as well as physical pain. And when we start to do that healing work, they start to feel much calmer in themselves. They feel much more confident. They feel a kind of an ease and a befriending of their physical body and of their selves. And so that means that they end up walking through life in a much more easeful, contented, harmonious, more relational, creative way. So that really is the essence of the work that I do, and the reason that I'm here today is because that relationship between the inside and the outside is the work that I do and the thing that I like to point people towards. So I call that inner leadership work. I call that sovereign leadership because of that relationship between the king and the queen, the health of the king and the queen, and the health of their realm from my love of stories and fairy tales. So,
Wonderful.
oh,
Thank you, David. Then checking with you, Sarah, sorry, and your approach to this, and maybe telling people a little bit about how you work.
Thank you. Yes, and welcome to all of you. Um, my name's Sarah. I'm based in Lisbon, but the accent can't fool you. I'm originally from the UK. I'm a multidisciplinary therapist and coach. And as Thor was saying, I do work from a very relational framework. So using my relationship with my clients as the foundation for any work that we do, but also I work both with individuals and with couples as well. So there are a lot of ways in which we're exploring deep self connection, but also connection with other people. And I work with people also experiencing difficult life transitions and emotional events. I used to work with grief an awful lot. Um, and I also work with people wanting to explore their patterns and how their patterns and how the things that they've learned, their conditioning impacts their relationships, including their relationship with themselves and their relationship with their body. So I work with them to explore how they might do things differently in order to live more full and more creative lives.
Wonderful. Thank you. So the way we're going to structure today is we've got three key questions. The first one is, how can physical movement be supportive of processing emotions and mental health? And what do we mean by physical movement? The second question is, why do we get stuck and what reduces our movement? And then the third one is, well, how do we get moving again? But what we want to do is before each question, we want to introduce a mini movement moment, like an M3. So we're going to start with David giving us a mini movement moment. and then we'll have the first question, and then we'll have the second moment, and then the second question, and then the third moment, and the third question. I've just realized I want to give a shout out to, I've had a number of emails this afternoon from people who are not able to be here in person, but I want the recording, but also just have emailed to wish me a happy International Self-Care Day. I just think that's really wonderful. And I'm looking forward to a future where this is what we do. We send each other happy International Self-Care Day messages. So I just want to plant that seed here for those of you who are here as something that we might want to continue as a habit or something that we do going forward. So David, if I can move across to you, you're going to start us off with our first mini movement moment.
Yeah, great. So yeah, I use this in some of the sessions that I do, and it's a really great way of just bringing people present so that they listen better, that they're more receptive and open. So it seemed like a really good place to start. So if you would all like to find a comfortable, if you're not already in a comfortable sitting position, but find yourself in a nice, comfortable seated position where your legs, like if you're in a chair, your legs aren't crossed, but your feet are on the floor, and you can feel your back supported by the back of the chair. And just let your arms relax in your lap. And with your eyes, you can either have your eyes closed or you can have your eyes open, but have like a soft gaze. So maybe you're looking out the window or looking down at the top of your desk so that you're not really intensely focusing on anything. And bring your attention to your feet. Become aware of your feet and your lower legs. And scan up through to the upper legs and your pelvis. Allow your attention to come to your belly and your lower back, your chest and your upper back. No need to change anything, but simply being aware of what is present for you. Be aware of your shoulders, your upper arms, your lower arms, your hands. Become aware of your neck and your head. Then make any adjustments so that you feel more balanced and upright and stable. So balancing your posture through your pelvis so that you're not too far to one side or leaning back too far or leaning forward too far. Shoulders directly over your hips and head balanced on the top of your spine. And also being aware of the space around you to the right and left, in front and behind, above and below you. And then relaxing the core muscles of the body, starting at the head. So the muscles in your forehead, your temples, the muscles around and between your eyes, the cheeks, the jaw and the tongue, let them relax as much as you can. Relax your throat and your chest. Allow your belly to soften and the muscles around your pelvis to soften. And sense your center of gravity dropping towards the floor. And if it helps to do so, imagine the floor pushing you back up so that you have a sense of length and you're feeling upright and dignified in your posture as much as you can. And finally, if it helps to do so, imagine that you're wearing a crown on your head, like you're the king or the queen of your life, and a cloak that flows over your shoulders, down your back towards the floor. And allow yourself to rest in this for a few moments. And when Thor's ready, they can take us to the next stage of the webinar.
Thank you, David. So for those of you who have closed your eyes, just gently opening your eyes, maybe twiddling your toes, shifting the focus from the inside of your experience back to the shared space on the screen. And noticing just what it felt like to be present with David's guidance. You know, whether aspects that you tripped over, whether things that were helpful or unhelpful about some of the language that he used. What does that mean for you? Whether aspects of your physical sensations that you noticed that you hadn't been aware of before. And that this idea of wearing a crown, what did that feel like? Is this something that you've considered before? Is it that you've something you experimented with before? Either a literal crown, because I know somebody who has actually invested in a literal crown to wear and practice, or metaphorically. Yeah. All right. So thank you very much for getting us into the kind of body as much as any of us are able to be in any moment. So let's then move into the first question. So the first question is, how can physical movement be supportive of processing emotions and thoughts? And what do we mean by physical movement? So it's quite a long first question. So just to open it up a little bit is to kind of getting curious about, well, what do we actually mean by physical movement and why does it matter? So I think, Zara, if we start with you, and then we'll find our way forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. First thing I'm going to say that there is so much that I could say on this subject. It could probably fill 4 webinars. So this is going to be a really condensed version of that. And also, please forgive me if I look down at my notes, but that's how I'm going to keep myself on track. So what I would like you to think about to begin with is how the way that we physically move through life can also often be reflective of our emotional state. And of course, this gets influenced by so many things, but often when we're struggling emotionally, our movement reduces, our activity gets reduced. And the reason that this can be a problem is that movement actually helps us to move through these emotional experiences, or to let them move through us. And it's really kind of the opposite of stuckness. And many of the strong emotional experiences that we have, and I'm thinking here of the kind of things that might activate our fight or flight responses, anger, grief, all these really strong emotions, when they become trapped or stuck or suppressed in the body, they can show up in all kinds of surprising ways. And that can look like pain, it can look like sleep disturbances, it can look like gut problems, and as well as obviously affecting our emotional state and our thinking. So through movement, we can release and renegotiate our responses. And what I mean by that is that we can learn to be less reactive by having more awareness. And also, this is also helpful, not just in our awareness of ourselves, but also our awareness of other people and our awareness of how we interact with them. And by knowing ourselves better, we make better choices. And we understand that we have options. And movement can help lower our anxiety. It can help reduce our arousal states, and it helps to regulate our mood. And I don't know if you've ever noticed that maybe sometimes when you're trying to figure out a problem, you might feel tempted to pace around the room. Or when you're on a phone call having a bit of a difficult conversation, you might want to walk around. And the reason that this movement is really effective is that it helps with our self-regulation, it helps to calm us down, it helps also with the fluidity of our thinking. But in addition, it's also really important for our cognitive function, and research shows also for our neuroplasticity. So literally our ability to adapt and lay down new pathways. So I'm going to come to the second part of the question quickly, which is about the variety within physical movement. And just to say that from my perspective, this doesn't need to be extreme. And it's important, particularly at the beginning, especially if you're in some kind of recovery, that what's more important to explore is what feels achievable and gentle and what might be right for you. I mentioned walking earlier on, and one of the reasons why walking is great is that it's the bilateral movement. It uses both sides of the body and also both sides of the brain. So it's really helpful for processing in that way. And while we're speaking of bilateral movement, it's important to remember that something like EMDR, so that stands for eye movement, eye movement desensitizing and reprocessing. I was about to get them the wrong way around. In its classic form is based only in eye movement. So it's important not to underestimate the power of really small physical movement as well. And I think the last thing that I really particularly want to add here is, from a trauma perspective, movement is really important because movement gives us a sense of agency. It gives us something that we can do. And sometimes there's nothing more disempowering or paralyzing, the sense that we can't affect a situation, that there's nothing we can do, that we feel helpless. And movement is always there to support us in that.
Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you. And I can really hear those key points there in terms of agency, that having the agency to move in whatever way, that it can be as small as eye movement and as big as climbing a mountain. And also that kind of sense that actually through moving the body physically, we're also moving our being, our experiences, and the emotional work as well, and in our thoughts as well. So I love the way you brought all that together. And I'll be curious to hear when we go into, why do we get stuck? To hear, how you talk about some of those befriending aspects as well, because I think you're laying a really good groundwork there to why this matters, why is this important? So I think David, if I come over to you and with this same question, why is this important? And what do we mean, or what do you mean by physical movement?
So the movement is important to me because, as Sarah said, when we find ourselves having a reaction to a certain event, the body mirrors the thinking that we have about that event. So I like to talk about this this circular thing that our thinking drives the feelings and sensations in our body, and those feelings and sensations drive our behavior, and our behavior drives outcomes, and our outcomes reinforce our thinking. So we have this kind of spiral, or this circular thing that reinforces itself. So one of the areas that we can work with is with our thinking, but another thing that we can do is we can work with behavior and help it track us back so it can impact our thinking. So if we're in a situation, say for example, you're in a conflict situation and you can feel yourself contracting, like you're making yourself small, there might be, the reason for that is that you're thinking that you feel unsafe, right? But one of the ways that you might be able to do that in the work that I do is like we talk about, say, the lover archetype. And just through the practice, for example, of placing your hand over your heart and allowing your attention to be with your heart space, there's a way in which you can kind of come out of that collapsed feeling and move the physical movement of becoming more upright, but also allowing your heart to be open, but also a little bit protected. Notice my hand is over my heart. I'm not like, take me now. Okay, but there is an element of, yeah, I'm protecting my heart, and it allows me to feel, and it allows me to be more present to this situation. And so I can stay present in the conflict and therefore represent myself in a more skillful and honest and authentic way. And I've got millions of examples that I could use, but that was the one that came to my mind. So movement, or physical movement, is important for me because if we stay in this contracted position, we can't necessarily know how to move out of it, but we can position our bodies in such a way that can help not just the behavior, but the feelings and sensations that we have that drive that behavior, and even working further back into our thinking so that we feel, maybe instead of feeling vulnerable, we feel safer. Yeah. That we feel um, unsafe, but we're able to feel boundaried as well. So there are a couple of examples there that I feel illustrate the questions that Thor's asking.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And I really love the way you're tracking that, the cycle, which is kind of thoughts, feelings, behavior, outcome, thought, and that cycle can be virtuous or it can be vicious, depending on how we're kind of engaging with that cycle, but that we are in an interactive relationship with our external reality all the time. And that where do we come to that place of choice? And that can even just placing that protective hand across your heart space. And I was mimicking that, or I was mirroring that, and just feeling that that actually changed the way I was feeling in my own body and my own experience. So thank you for that contribution as well, David, which then brings me to my aspect and my interest in kind of befriending the body, the way I see that relationship of physical movement being supportive to other aspects of our experience and what I mean by physical movement. So in the First Lateral Feelings manual, let me see. Yeah, I've got a copy of it here. In the manual, we talk about feeling profile, and one of the sort of identifying how do you create a feeling, and one of them is posture, and that aligns very much with what David is saying. You know, it's like in terms of how the posture I'm doing affects the feeling I'm feeling, the state that I'm in. And so when we start to see these things as part of the mind-body connection, part of the interactive relationship with ourselves, that they are not separate, we can then start to move one or more of these aspects. And so thinking about, okay, well, within my body, within my physical abilities, and that could be ranging from bedbound to athletic. You know, I work with people who are bedbound, who have got ME/CFS, who've got fibromyalgia, who've got other conditions of that level. I've also worked with Tour de France athletes. You know, it's like to work across those different capacities. Actually, it's the same way. It's this, the structure of the connection is the same. It's like, how well do we engage with the body? How much do we understand the movements that our body is capable of? You know, within my current capacity, what can I move? How can I move it? And then how does that help me ease or amplify the emotions or thoughts that I'm having to make them worse or better? So as we recognize or we become more familiar with this idea that our body isn't separate from our emotions or isn't separate from our thoughts, we're going to go, actually, no, this is an interconnected dynamic. We can then look at actually how does moving my body change how I feel? And I think very much kind of that's what David was talking about, that's what Sarah's talking about. And I think my mini movement moment that I bring in later will also bring in that aspect of that kind of little mini hack on changing something physically that actually then majorly affects the feeling state itself. I think also, and David alluded to this as well, and as well as Sarah, is that when we feel under threat in any way, and that could be from pain or from other people or from some external circumstances, the tendency is to contract. The tendency is to go into freeze, the play possum, to not do, to not move. And even when we are struggling physically with pain and we kind of feel like it's not the right thing to, it's not a good idea to move, actually, that may be an unhelpful thought. So I'll share, well, because a couple of weeks ago I was sailing. It's one of them, I do it once a week, 1 week, sorry, a year. And it gives me immense joy, but I only do it for that 1 week a year. And I actually had an injury. I fell into the water between the quay and the boat and I cracked 3 ribs. And what were the urge to contract and not move was really strong. Whereas actually the best thing to do in that situation, and because I knew this, I was able to implement it, would actually is to gently open up and move the rib cage, to really do some breathing exercises to help the body deal with the shock of falling in the water, the shock of being caught between the boat and the quay, and then actually to help support the lungs, the spleen, the rib cage to not contract even further after the event had happened. So actually being able to understand and getting a sense of, well, how well do I know my body? How well can I trust that this is the right idea? So like me and my body have such a beautiful relationship that I could really get a sense of, okay, I can move my body this much. If I go any further, that's actually going to become unhelpful. And that is literacy. It's like reading and responding. And that kind of, we talk about health literacy and emotional literacy. And part of that is that kind of body literacy. How well can you read and respond to your own physical sensations? And that's really is my invitation to you as we go into the second mini movement moment and we go into the kind of second question, is for you to take a moment to check, how well do I know how to read and respond to my body's sensations? How well do I know my own capacity? How well do I know when my body is going, ouch? Or when my body's going, I'm tired, or I'm this or that? Do you know what that actually means? What level of friendship do you like, if you like, have you currently got with your body? And just thinking here in the moment, even if you were to score it on the scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being like non-existent friendship or relationship, to 10 out of 10 being beautiful, I would say where I was back in the, like back 2000, I was like 0, even minus, whereas now it's like a 10 out of 10. In this moment, where would you score your friendship, your relationship with your body? And that includes understanding what it's telling you. So you might want to share that in the chat. I know Zoe's been putting messages in the chat, and I can see there's a message from you as well. You might want to bring it into the Q&A after we finish the recording. But just to take a moment to jot down a number. And it could be like between, it might not always be the same, so it could be between 4 and 7 or something like that. It might not always be at the same level. But just to give a sense of what is the quality of your relationship in this moment. So then, Sarah, if we come across to you, you're going to do our second mini movement moment, our second M3, and you're going to be talking about bilateral movement, which we touched on just earlier. So over to you.
Yes, one of the, hold on. The exercise I'm going to invite you to is called the butterfly hug. And it is quite a gentle, self-soothing technique. And it was actually developed by 2 EMDR therapists. So it is about that bilateral processing. So you're using both sides of the body and therefore engaging both sides of the brain. It can be very helpful when we feel overwhelmed, disconnected, or shut down. So it's just a useful thing to have in your pocket for when you need it. So if it feels right for you and you would like to try it while we're here, then please go ahead. If it, for any reason it doesn't, then please feel free to try it later, have a go with the recording. And also, if at any point it doesn't feel good to you, please make sure that you pay attention to that and you can pause and stop doing this at any time. Okay? So to begin with, again, I would like to ask you to sit comfortably in the seat you're in and feel, if you possibly can, your feet on the floor. And just lower your gaze from the screen. If you prefer, you're very welcome to close your eyes, but as long as we're looking down from the screen. Again, it takes away that distraction. And then I'm going to invite you to cross your arms over your chest. So your hands rest on the opposite upper arm or shoulder, like you're giving yourself a hug. Now make sure it's comfortable. And then begin to tap slowly, alternating left and right, and left and right, and left and right, and left and right. Keep tapping gently, like a heartbeat. Notice how it feels. There's no need to force or change anything. Notice as you continue to tap that your breathing might slow down. And take the opportunity to quietly tell yourself that you're safe, or to use any calming words that might feel true or right for you. And gently let the tapping slow. Come to stillness. And let your arms rest into your lap. And take a moment before you look up, before you open your eyes, to see if anything shifted even a little bit. Feeling more settled, more emotional, or even feeling nothing at all would all be okay responses here. I'm going to hand you back to Thor.
Wonderful. Thank you, Zara, for that beautiful little experiment. And I could feel, particularly because I cracked my ribs, I could feel they really enjoyed this. My ribs were like, oh, this is nice. So I'll be curious to hear how anybody else experienced it. Maybe we'll share it in the chat, or, once we stop the recording later. So that brings us to the second question. So I'm mindful we've got about 20 minutes remaining of our webinar time. So the second question is, why do we get stuck and what reduces our movement? So David, we're coming to you to start us off with answering that question.
Thank you. So, repeat the question for me, please.
Yeah. So why do we get stuck? So why do we stop being physically active?
Yep.
And what reduces our movement? And I can give you a prompt word because we all agreed what the answer essentially is.
Okay. So, so let me tell you my personal experience. For me, that has been transformative, both on the downward curve and also on the upward curve. So I was brought up in a very loving family, but not a very emotionally intelligent family. So, um, so particularly that people didn't know how to be around really strong emotions. And because of that lack of literacy, it often meant that family members wouldn't deal with quite emotive situations or emotive topics in a very emotionally sensitive way, right? So I had a really, really strong bond with my sister, who's quite a bit older than me. And when I was 7, my sister, who was living at home at the time, moved abroad to become an au pair, and she ended up living abroad for the rest of her life. And the first that I heard about this was when the suitcase was left by the front door and she was about to go to the airport. And I completely lost I just lost it completely. And although it was a very upsetting moment for me and I really retreated into myself, I was, quite quiet for a while, and I was also like retreated into my bedroom and into this kind of like fantasy world that I created for myself, which was all actually very lovely. But the bit that happened very unconsciously that I wasn't aware of for years later was the way I like to think of it now is like in that moment, it's like I had this spiritual heart attack. And the muscles in the left side of my body started to contract and to tighten around my heart space, so that I got a lot of tightness in the left side of my chest. I lost a lot of movement in my left shoulder and my left arm. And it was completely inexplicable, as often these things are to the medical profession. But so I've got to make sure that I don't ruin the punchline for this third question. So in answer to this question, the thing that I've learned about this is that there are all kinds of unconscious ways in which the body responds to emotion that cannot be or isn't processed and expressed in that moment. So often, for example, the way we might think of that is maybe with our breathing. You know, like if we've been quite stressed for a long time and that we're worried about stuff, that we might notice our breathing becomes quite fast and quite shallow. But this particular example was a really, really long-term thing that I mean, I was aware of the lack of physical movement, but there was no way in which I could work out why that was happening. And traditional explanations just weren't working. So it sent me on this whole wonderful journey of trying to discover what was really going on and to discover the impact of that it had in my life. Um, and I'll stop there because there's a exciting reveal that comes with it later on.
Thank you, David, and for sharing so open-heartedly of your experience. And I think that's a really beautiful example of how the single thing that I think we all agreed on in our chat before today's webinar, the single thing that affects movement is trauma.
Mm.
Whether it's physical trauma, emotional trauma, mental, whatever kind of trauma, that the thing that actually affects of us physically, reduces our movements and brings us into stuckness away from movement is trauma. So my invitation to you is to get curious about, and as much as it feels safe, because working with trauma can be a very tender process. And one of the reasons I developed First Aid for Feelings, because I needed it, recognizing or realizing that I was dealing with complex PTSD. So going gently with yourselves, if that is your experience, but that the single kind of thing to check in with, if there are any kind of limitations to you stopping physical activity or being physically active, or disconnecting from your body. Remember, the theme today is befriending your body. So we only need to befriend our body if there has been a break in our relationship with our body, because otherwise the relationship is just lovely. Thank you very much. But if we need to befriend it again, then there's been a rupture or a break in the relationship with the body. And that almost always, as far as I can tell, and think we all can, Sarah, David, and I, is that there will have been a trauma of some sort that was a big or a small part of that rupture. So I'm going to leave it at that from my perspective, and then come over to you, Sarah, in terms of your response to that question, in terms of why do we get stuck and what reduces movement?
I think we've touched on probably the main elements, but the part I would like to bring to this is that when we respond to a trauma, when we respond to intense emotional experience as well, and we have this tendency to make our world smaller, we want to feel safer. Maybe we reduce our movement, maybe we have the tendency to isolate, maybe we start to become a bit stuck in our emotions. The purpose of this is that it's a really fundamental way that we've learned to protect ourselves. It's a really fundamental response in that respect. And it isn't there to derail us, it isn't there to cause us a problem. But unfortunately, while it might have been a suitable response at some point in our lives or at some time, the trouble is it's just not working that well now for where we are and for how we want to be. So I think one of the things about befriending the body is also not demonizing that defense.
Mm.
And by recognizing that while it's there and it has a function and it has a purpose and an importance, can we ask it to stand down and find something else that we can do instead? And I think this would also apply if we're talking about something physical that happens as well, because we can be derailed in our habits and in our movement so easily by illness, by injury. Doris, you mentioned all of these kinds of things, and we just can't do things in the way that we might once have done. And again, I think the helpful thing here is to realize that we maybe need to minimize in order to heal. We maybe need to minimize in order to figure something out over again. And that also can be a befriending process. Yes, it can be really frustrating. Yes, it can be really annoying, but it is there so that we can slow down, so that we can pay attention. And the last thing I would say also is the fatigue that comes with all of this, the fatigue that comes with mental processing, the fatigue that comes with pain, the fatigue that comes with overwhelm and burnout and any of these kind of things that we might be dealing with. That is also going to encourage us to minimize, to slow down, to step back from doing things. We won't feel like moving in the way that we might have once done. But again, it's about kind of coming back and going, okay, so what can I do? And we need a little bit of self-governance here. So maybe I have a lot of clients who are like, I must go back to yoga, I must go back to Pilates, I've got to do this. And sometimes I say to them, well, what about if you just rolled your mat out at home and just rolled about on it for 5 minutes? That would be a start. It would be a move in that right direction. That might be what you can do right now. And let's find out and celebrate it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And you touching there on my favorite question of all times, is it helpful? You know, something can be helpful for a while and then becomes unhelpful. It's not like it's a good thing or a bad thing to do. Just is it in this moment, is this the most helpful course of action or most helpful choice for me in this moment? And that there is a place and time for retraction as well as for working towards that expansion again. And I think that self-governance really connects in with David's word sovereignty, you know, that being our sovereign, or I often go personal agency, which I think is such an important aspect of this. So then let's move towards our third mini movement moment. So there's something that I talk about and I refer to as the chin factor. It's part of the 6 components of state. So when we are creating any state, any feeling, there are 6 components, including the thought, we're having the tone of voice, we're having that thought in, the emotion, the sensation, where we're placing our focus in terms of the past, present, and the future. But for this particular purposes, I want to talk about the posture, the structure of our positioning, and particularly your chin. So I'd like to invite you to do a little experiment with me, because often it can be amazing how just the tiniest movement can actually radically change how we feel. So if you imagine that you're just keeping head above water, so you're slightly raising your chin, nothing radical, you're just raising it by like 1 or 2 degrees, and just notice what it feels like to be straining a little bit at your neck, just a little bit. You're not going anything like this, you're just going a little bit up. Just notice, what does it feel like to do that? What happens to your emotions? What happens to your sensations? What happens to what you're able to literally see when your gaze is slightly raised like that? Your chin is just ever so slightly raised. Then taking a breath, coming back to a 90-degree position, just, you know, level, feeling level-headed, which in English is an actual thing. And then just dipping your chin by 1 degree, just a little dip, just gently dipping your chin down. And by the same token, notice what happens to the back of your neck, kind of pull of that. Notice what's within your sight. What can you see from here? What changes in terms of how you feel? What happens to your shoulders? My shoulders become a bit more rounded, a bit more hunched. And that can affect my confidence, actually. I don't know how that feels for you. Yeah. And then coming back to level, coming back to 90 degrees, maybe just softening your shoulders, getting a sense of this is kind of a neutral position. So I'd be curious to hear either in the chat or in the Q&A after, when we stop the recording, what did it feel like to do this very tiny change in movement? Did it affect you? In what way? What did you notice about it? And how can you imagine applying that in other settings in terms of how to just subtly but significantly shifting your state? So we're then on to our third question, which is, well, how can we get moving again? So I'm curious to hear about David's kind of coming through his recovery and how he re-engaged and got himself moving again. So coming back to David first, there may be like a top hack or top tip for getting moving again. And then I'll ask Sarah the same question in terms of how to get moving again, and then I'll bring my own at the end. So, David, if you could give us the kind of the conclusion to your story.
Yeah, thanks. So I know we're short of time. So after years of therapy, I started to hear about like physical therapies, like one was Rolfing, and the other is the Feldenkrais method. So these are two um, therapies, if you like, that I started to use that work very much with the movement of the body. So Rolfing is more kind of harder and manipulative to move, uh, whereas Feldenkrais is much softer. But what started to happen for me was I started to experience more movement in my ribs, more movement in my shoulder, more movement in my left arm. But what started to happen was I would experience a lot of emotional release. So I started to understand what had happened to me all of those years ago, and I was in my 40s when this was happening. But the other thing that was really, really interesting was that I started to feel more confident, and I started to walk through the world feeling much more confident about who I was, how I related to other people, how I saw the world, how I felt safer in the world. And it was just this amazing transformation and revelation that I had through a period of months. Um, and I started to move through the world with much more ease, right? So, I used my body more fully. I could use my body more easily. So there was this whole kind of there was this whole physical and psychological thing that was happening. And I'd always had an understanding of the mind-body connection, but this was like for me on a completely different level. And, for me, it was life-changing. So as a hack to do something like the Feldenkrais method, which is almost always done lying on the floor or seated. It's always done slowly and with mindfulness to just develop this new relationship or a deeper relationship with your body in movement. For me, was transformational, and I would recommend it to anybody.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. So Feldenkrais, for those of you who don't know, it's Zoe, if you could maybe pick this up, it's Felden, F-E-L-D-N, Kreis, K-R-E-I-S, and Rolfing is R-O-L-F-I-N-G. Then there are others like trauma release exercises like TRE, and somatic experiencing. There's SOMATIC, experiencing. And there are SE practitioners as well. So there are a number of different ways of becoming more embodied, being more in your body, as well as doing work with people like myself, David and Sarah. But that kind of actually getting curious, exploring, getting to know your body firsthand, not through your mind, not through your head, but actually through your body. So coming over to you, Sarah, maybe your top tip on how to do that befriending, how to get that relationship started.
Yeah, for me, the top tip would maybe be about looking at our self-talk, because very often when we stop moving or when we're going to embark on starting something new, sometimes we don't speak to ourselves that kindly. And if we can find ways to gently encourage ourselves into that movement, it's going to probably be more effective and definitely more enjoyable than if we're giving ourselves a really hard time for it. So in terms of that befriending process, let's remember that guilt and shame are horrible motivators. And better still is to lean into that encouragement, that gentle, compassionate approach that we can develop with ourselves and move ourselves forward. And again, about understanding what's available, finding what you like, in being able to enjoy that as a process, perhaps. And to give yourself the time and space to build a practice. I think that would probably be my top tip. I know from my own experience, about 10 years ago, I accidentally mistook a glass panel for an open exit on a bright sunny day, and caused some quite significant injuries, particularly to one leg. And I realized that all the movement I'd been doing up to that point, the running, the dancing, the boot camp style exercise, it was all about doing it right and nothing about intuitive movement. So actually for me, leaning into really small and intuitive movement became a path back into moving again.
Wow, what an experience. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think what I'm really hearing is that difference between striving, so being with the body in a striving kind of way, whereas being with your body in a kind of relationship kind of way. And I love the fact that you use the word relational often in the way you describe your work. And it sounds like that is really what shifted there in your self-relationship with your body. And I think and this kind of reminds me of what you're talking about in terms of self-talk. It's so important. And literally this morning, the business network that David and I are part of, we have a meeting on Thursday mornings, and we were talking this morning, and the person who runs that, Anne Hawkins, was kind of spotlighting how I talk to myself. And I've been describing the falling overboard and everything. And I was like, sweetheart, darling, and, how are you doing, honey? And it was interesting to hear somebody else note my self-talk, because this is how I talk to myself. Me and myself and I, we talk like that all the time. And it's so different from how I talked to myself 20, 30 years ago, which was much more that shaming, blaming, name calling. There was none of that terms of endearment. There was none of that care, that warmth, that tone of voice. That's something I've actively worked with over the years. And now it's just the way my relationship is with myself. But it's not, I don't take it for granted. I really do know all the work that I invested in, sort of bringing that self relationship into the space where this is how me, myself, and I talk to each other. So even though you may not be quite at the darling sweetheart level yet in terms of your self talk, starting somewhere and getting really curious about, well, how am I talking to my body? What am I doing? And coming back to my favorite question, is it helpful? I think for me, my hack and my top tip is to start small. So I have I've had dogs for a long time. They tend to be rescue dogs, so they come from traumatic backgrounds. And one things that I find that dogs are really good teachers at, or they teach us very well, is to go slow and go small. Because if I'm trying to teach the dog something big straight off the bat, they're just not going to get it. It's going to regress, or things are going to get worse. So breaking things down to small steps and kind of rewarding behaviors, not necessarily with food treats, but with praise and loving language. The metaphor or the example I often use is that if you're training a horse to do show jumps, you don't take the horse to the biggest jump. Just that you start them just like walking over the pole on the grass. So if you're in your self-talk, in your relationship with your body, you may know that you want to get over that big jump, but you don't start there. You start with the smallest thing you can start with. And then as you build up those kind of positive reinforcements and that kind of, okay, yeah, this is how much I can do. This, oh, that was a bit much. Okay, let's step back a little bit. You also start to get more of what Sarah was talking about, that intuitive relationship with the body. So rather than the mind driving this mind-body connection, that is actually a collaboration and going, hello, there are, at least two aspects or two voices here, if not more. So that brings us to the end of the webinar part. I'm going to ask David and Sarah for some final words, but also just to remind you that we'll be closing the recording very shortly. So if you've got something that you'd like to have in the chat on the recording, or something that you like to be shared in the recording, do bring that in now so we can make sure that it's included. So David, if I go first to you, any final words or sort of final tips or messages you'd like to say or share?
Is this where we're sharing for how people can get in contact with us as well, or is this not?
Yeah, absolutely. That could definitely be part of that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to check. So yeah, I appreciate and acknowledge that sometimes the body can be not a very not at all a comfortable or safe place to be, either through physical pain or emotional pain. But the fact that you're here, I think, implies that you're already on that journey of trying to reintegrate with yourself in an embodied sense. You're already on that journey, and so first of all, I just want to kind of celebrate and champion that you're on that journey, and that to keep going, as part of that. And one of the resources that I've created is a resource, just a little workbook, like a little PDF that I'm in the process of creating right now, that is to do with, how to be with your emotions from an embodied perspective. So this workbook is in production. I tried to get it done for this particular event, but we weren't able to do that. So if anyone would be interested in that little workbook, then please, I think Zoe's going to put my email either. There you go. The email's right there. How wonderful, Zoe. Thank you. But yeah, feel free to email me, and when the PDF is ready, then I will email it straight to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And Zara, coming over to you, both kind of, sort of final message, but also in terms of getting in touch with you, and why that might be helpful to somebody.
So I think what I would just like to echo is really what we've all said about keeping it small, keeping it achievable, and keeping it collaborative, because it's a long journey to take alone, and it's probably more fun if you and your body can do that together in a more kind of cohesive, more collaborative way. And while I don't have anything to bring in terms of a PDF and all of that kind of thing, I'm going to ask Zoe if she wouldn't mind sharing my website as well. And as well as working with me in that context, I do have something coming up probably towards the end of the year, which would be an individual and group coaching program, which would be around the theme of belonging. So encouraging people to further their self development journey by looking at their relationship to themselves, their relationship to others within that kind of thing. It will include ongoing support from me, but also some guest teachers as well. So if that sounds like anything that might be interesting to you, please feel free to get in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you, Zara. And also, we will be sharing those details in the follow-up email, where you'll also get access to the recordings. And of course, if you lose this information, you can always get in touch with Zoe and I, and we will make sure that we forward it as well. I think final words for me while we're still on the recording is to really recognize that if you're watching this, if you've been here, you are already, like David said, well on your way. And I really want to honor that curiosity, that compassion that you bring in simply by being here. And I feel that you're not just doing that for you, but you're also doing that for the rest of us. Because I do feel like, self-care is other care. And it's something that we can often not recognize, that putting my oxygen mask on myself first isn't just a self-focused act, it's also a compassionate act. Because when we are able to, when we know the self-care we need, when we have access to our own body and our body's information, we are able to be more present with others and let them know our possibilities, our capacities, and our limitations. And then finally, as well, just that sense of if you are struggling with your body, if you're struggling to stay connected with your body, there will be a reason for that. That's not random. If you're struggling to connect or befriend your body, there will be some beliefs, some experiences, some traumas, some aspects that will have influenced that experience. So even though you may not know yet what that information means, it's an invitation to get curious. So really holding that possibility that, like you say in EFT, which is the emotional freedom technique, even though I don't know yet what this means, I'm open to the possibility of learning and finding out more. So from us, if you'd like to check out the website, firstlittlefeelings.com, of course, but also the First Little Feelings manual. We've got there's a download for the introduction and the first chapter, and Zoe is putting that into the chat as a peek preview. We can get a sense of the manual. Is it put together in a way that's likely to be helpful to you? And is it helpful is always my favorite question. So do check that out to see if that's something that might be helpful. And like I said, I created First Little Feelings because I needed it, both to befriend my own body and also to work through the illnesses and the traumas that I had at the time. So it's very much coming from the inside of an experience. So on that note, to those of you who are watching the recording afterwards, thank you so much for being here. Stay in touch, reach out in whatever way feels helpful to you. And as always, always, always remember that it's more helpful to be curious than critical. Thank you. And please stop the recording, Zoe. So it's probably at the bottom of the screen, on the toolbar at the bottom.